Do you believe that there are places, even after being abandoned for decades, where just stepping inside can make your skin crawl, as if unseen eyes are tracking your every move? In a poor fishing village by the sea, there stood an old, weathered wooden house, covered in moss, isolated among newly built homes. No one dared venture near it because behind those crumbling walls lay a blood curse that had never been lifted. At night, under the dim moonlight, people could still hear the hollow knocking on the door, the soft, sorrowful cries echoing from within the desolate house, piercing through the thick sea mist. No one knew exactly what had happened there. They only knew that those who dared to step inside soon met a tragic fate. As if they had awakened a tormented soul still trapped between worlds. Today's story will take you across the thin line between life and death. Don't take your eyes off the screen, because what you're about to hear might make you look at that old abandoned house in your own neighborhood very differently. There are places where even standing at a distance sends chills down your spine. And in that poor fishing village by the sea, there was such a house. And lifted her eyes to the scene ahead, a tiny fishing village, peaceful yet cloaked in the grayness of the season's end. She took a deep breath. The salty scent of the sea mixed with the pale sunlight, weighing heavily on her heart. Pretty, huh? But it feels off somehow. Min, An's boyfriend, whispered and chuckled. You? Scared? Hi. Min's best friend jumped in. Scared of what? As long as Lan's with me, I can take on anything. Lan, Hai's girlfriend, forced a smile, squeezing Hai's hand tightly, her eyes darting nervously toward the end of the village road. There, among the old tin-roofed houses, stood a dilapidated wooden house. Its windows hung loosely, the roof sagged dangerously, and wild grass grew thick around it. The house looked like a black scar against the otherwise peaceful village backdrop. And followed her gaze, frowning slightly. An indescribable chill crept into her chest. Whose house is that? Min asked hoarsely. An old woman carrying water happened to pass by. Hearing the question, she stopped in her tracks. Her clouded eyes, as if covered by mist, turned toward them, and she shook her head slowly. That house, it's been abandoned for a long time. Don't be foolish enough to go near it. She shuffled away, leaving behind only a trail of thin smoke and heavy silence. Min laughed, trying to break the tension. Old folks are just superstitious. It's just an old house, nothing to be scared of. Hai chimed in. Why don't we test our bravery tonight and go inside? Lan widened her eyes. Are you crazy? But Hai turned to An, grinning slyly. What about you, An? Dare to go? An stayed silent. Part of her wanted to refuse, but her curiosity burned even stronger. Seeing the teasing glint in their eyes, she nodded. Let's do it. Tonight. Night fell, and the village sank into a misty sea. Only a few dim streetlights flickered in the salty breeze. An's group, carrying flashlights, quietly made their way toward the abandoned house. The old wooden door creaked in the wind. Far off, the sound of waves crashing mixed with the loud thudding of An's heart. Min, gathering his courage, gently pushed the door. Bam! The door swung open. A blast of cold wind rushed out, making everyone shiver. Inside, it was pitch black. The heavy smell of mold and decay filled the air. Hai swept his flashlight across the room. The walls were peeling, the rotten curtains fluttered eerily, and an old cracked mirror hung crookedly on the wall. As the beam of light swept past, Lan suddenly screamed, I saw someone standing behind Min. Everyone spun around at once. But there was no one. Nothing but the suffocating darkness. Min laughed nervously. Lan must have imagined it, but in the flickering light, and caught a glimpse, in the mirror, faintly reflected, was the image of a girl in a white dress, her long hair covering her face, standing silently behind them. Let's go deeper. We're already here. Hai laughed loudly, pulling the group further inside, and stepped into the living room. The wooden floor creaked loudly with every step. Suddenly, a few cold drops fell from the ceiling. And looked up. The ceiling was cracked wide open. But why did it sound like the drops were blood? She wiped her forehead with trembling fingers. A dark red streak smeared across her hand. At that moment, from deep within the house, came a soft, eerie giggle, like a young woman's laugh. Lan burst into tears, clinging tightly to Hai. I can't take this anymore. Please, let's leave. Min's face turned pale too. Why yeah, maybe we should just go back. But when they turned to leave, the door behind them had slammed shut without anyone noticing. And, from within the darkness, a pale, icy hand slowly crawled out of the cracked mirror and stumbled backward, falling to the floor. In that chilling moment, she felt it, an icy gaze staring straight into her soul. The house seemed to come alive, writhing like a dying beast. The sound of the wind, the dripping water, the murmured whispers, all blended into a chilling symphony of death. And that was only the beginning. That pale, ghostly hand was just inches from Anne's face. In that moment of sheer terror, she sprang to her feet, grabbing Min and sprinting toward the door. Min pounded against the rotting wooden door, but it didn't budge. Lan huddled tightly against Hai, tears streaming down her face. Don't split up, Hai shouted, his voice cracking with fear. But just then, a sharp click echoed through the air. A light bulb on the ceiling flickered and went out. Darkness engulfed them. In the pitch-black room, the sound of slow, dragging footsteps scraped across the rotten wooden floor. Step, step, step. And held her breath. Her heart pounded so loudly she was afraid even a single deep breath might alert whatever was creeping toward them. Suddenly, Min cried out, panic in his voice. Hey, who's holding my hand? No one answered, because everyone was clutching each other tightly. A hand, ice cold, was gripping Min's hand. Min jerked away and frantically swept his flashlight around. In the trembling beam, they saw a figure dressed in white, with long hair covering her face, standing motionless in the corner of the room. The air froze. No one dared to move. The figure slowly raised her head. Her face was sunken and bruised, and her dead white eyes stared unblinking at them. Lan screamed, a piercing shriek that tore through the darkness. At that same moment, a blast of cold wind rushed into the house, flinging the door open. Without thinking, the group bolted, trampling over each other as they fled. They didn't stop running until they reached the mouth of the alley. Panting and gasping for breath, Lan collapsed to the ground, clutching her head and sobbing uncontrollably. Hai held her tightly, shaking almost as badly, and turned back to look. The abandoned house still stood alone in the darkness, its window shutters creaking in the wind, almost as if waving them back. Min rummaged through his pockets, his voice trembling. Where's my phone? Who's got the phone? Panic surged through them. The phone Min had been using to record their exploration had vanished. Min swore he had felt it in his hand right before they ran out, and bit her lip. A sinking dread gnawed at her heart. Dragging their exhausted bodies, the group finally made it back to their tiny seaside motel. Lan sat curled up in a corner, her eyes vacant, her lips muttering incomprehensible words, and approached her gently. Lan, are you okay? Lan only shook her head, whispering something so faint it barely sounded like her voice anymore. Don't go in. Don't go in. Once you're in, you'll never get out. Silence fell. The air grew thick, heavy like a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. That night, and tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, she suddenly heard a faint clicking sound, the soft creak of footsteps sneaking out of the room. She cracked her eyes open. Under the dim yellow hallway light, she saw Lan shuffling barefoot across the cold tile floor, heading straight toward the abandoned house. Lan, and screamed, leaping out of bed to chase after her. Min and Hai, startled, scrambled after her, slipping on the wet, misty ground. Outside, the fog was thick and icy, wrapping around them like 1,000 invisible hands. Every step felt like sinking into a bottomless void. And ran, shouting desperately for Lan, but Lan seemed hypnotized, her empty eyes fixed ahead as she trudged toward the abandoned house. The ocean wind howled, carrying with it a twisted, ghostly laughter from deep within the night. Finally, they caught up to Lan just before she stepped over the crumbling threshold of the house. Lan stood frozen like a statue, her eyes rolled back, tears streaming down her face. her body trembling violently. It was as if an invisible hand was dragging her into the house. Inch by inch, relentlessly, and screamed in desperation, "Lan, wake up, come back to us." Hai lunged forward, grabbing Lan and pulling her back. Lan thrashed wildly, like a puppet on broken strings, her mouth spilling out guttural, incoherent moans. It took all three of them pulling together to drag Lan away from the cursed doorway. As soon as they crossed the boundary away from the house, Lan collapsed into Hai's arms, sobbing in broken, gasping breaths. "I heard someone calling me, in my head. They said I had to stay," and hugged Lan tightly, tears welling up in her own eyes. She glanced back at the abandoned house. Through the mist, she could faintly make out the figure of a girl in a white dress, her long, wet hair clinging to her face, standing silently by the rotting window frame, her empty gaze fixed straight at them. Between her cracked, bloodless lips, it seemed, she was whispering something, a chilling invitation, from the other side. The next morning, the fishing village was shrouded in a cold, ashen hue, the sea veiled in mist like a mourning shroud, and sat silently on the motel porch, her tired eyes staring into the distant void, even though they had pulled Lan away from the abandoned house last night. The fear refused to leave, lingering in every heavy breath. Lan lay motionless in the room, occasionally moaning incoherent words, as if her soul were trapped between two worlds. Min sat beside her, his face pale and hollow, his voice hoarse as he spoke. "We can't just leave things like this. We have to find a way to end it," and simply nodded. A fierce determination stirred within her. If they wanted to save Lan, they had to uncover the secret hidden behind those crumbling walls. They couldn't keep running forever. That afternoon, and followed the dusty red path to a ramshackle house tucked away at the end of the village, the home of Granny Ba, the strange old woman who had warned them before. When it arrived, Granny Ba was sitting there, weaving strips of dry palm leaves. Her clouded eyes seemed as deep and endless as an ancient well, as if she had been expecting it all along. "You've come," Granny Ba murmured, her voice rough like the sea crashing against the cliffs, and sat down across from her, her voice trembling. "Can you tell me what really happened in that house?" Granny Ba fell silent for a long time. Only the wind rustling through the old bamboo grove filled the space. Finally, she sighed deeply, each word heavy with sorrow. "It's a heartbreaking story, my child. Years ago, when the village was still steeped in poverty, a fisherman's family lived in that house. They owned nothing but an old fishing boat and their only daughter, Han, a girl known far and wide for her beauty, kindness, and virtue. Then one season, a violent storm ravaged the coast, swallowing boats whole and spreading famine through the land. One day, the village chief's precious gold bracelet mysteriously disappeared. Without investigation, driven by hunger and suspicion, the villagers pinned all the blame on Han, who had just helped at the chief's house the day before. They dragged her back, tied her hands, and locked her inside that crumbling house, proclaiming it was punishment for a thief. Han begged and cried, but her sobs were drowned by the furious winds howling from the sea. That night, during a storm, the villagers found her hanging from the ceiling, her eyes wide open, filled with endless sorrow and rage. Her family soon left the village in shame, abandoning the house, leaving behind a blood-stained curse that seeped into every piece of wood and crumbling brick. Granny Ba grasped En's hand tightly, her eyes flashing with pain. "A soul that dies unjustly, if not vindicated, will never move on, forever wandering the mortal world." En's throat tightened, her eyes stinging with tears. Suddenly, from deep inside the rickety house, came three slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Startled, and spun around, Granny Ba merely closed her eyes and whispered, "It's time, you must face it." Back at the motel, and recounted everything to Min and Hai. Min paled as he listened, stammering, "But we don't have any proof to clear her name." Hai suddenly remembered and shouted, "Wait, I saw something under the floorboards the other day. Looked like an old notebook." En's eyes lit up. "If we find that notebook, maybe we can uncover the truth." Without hesitation, They decided to return to the abandoned house, not to test their courage this time, but to find a way to lift the curse hanging over all of them. Night fell. The moonlight sliced across the sea like a blade. They walked in silence along the white sandy path. The wind howled in gusts, carrying ghostly whispers from the direction of the house. When they arrived, the old door was already slightly ajar, as if waiting for them. Without hesitation, they stepped inside. The air was deathly cold, thick with the stench of mold and decay, and swept her flashlight across every corner. Beneath a tattered, rotting rug, a section of the floor bulged up unnaturally. Min braced himself and pried it open. In the faint light, a small wooden box emerged, covered in dust, and his hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was an old journal. Its cover faded but the writing inside still intact. And flipped to the first page, and a scrawled message leapt out at her. "If anyone finds this notebook, please tell everyone. I didn't steal anything. I am innocent. Han." Tears blurred Anne's vision as her shaking fingers touched those desperate words. The atmosphere around them grew heavier. Suddenly, from the corner of the room, came the sound of sobbing, heart-wrenching, soul-crushing sobs. They all spun around. In the flickering darkness, a figure appeared. A girl in a white dress, kneeling on the cold floor, her long hair covering her face, her shoulders quivering with grief, and stood frozen. She knew Han's spirit was still here, still in pain, still desperate, still waiting for her name to be cleared after all these years. The air froze in place, leaving only the sound of heart-wrenching sobs echoing throughout the crumbling house. And stood motionless, her eyes stinging, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Beside her, Min and Hai were also frozen, too stunned to utter a single word. The image of the girl in the white dress kneeling on the cold floor carved itself into their minds. A scar that would never fade. Anne, trembling, took a step forward, each step weighed down with fear, as if even a breath too loud might shatter the fragile moment. But when she was just a few steps away, the white figure suddenly dissolved into thin air, as if she had never existed. A cold gust of wind blasted through the house, sending the tattered curtains flapping wildly and scattering papers across the room. Min rushed to Anne, grabbing her and pulling her back. "Let's go. If we stay here any longer, we'll end up dead too." Hai stooped down and hastily grabbed the diary, his hand shaking uncontrollably, and didn't resist. She felt hundreds of unseen eyes boring into her every move, making her skin crawl. They bolted out of the house, racing through the narrow sandy alley, sprinting madly back toward the motel. The ocean winds that night howled so fiercely, it felt as if they would sweep the entire fishing village away into oblivion. As soon as they stumbled inside, Min slammed the door shut and leaned against the wall, gasping for air. Lan sat curled up in the corner, her vacant eyes staring into nothingness, muttering incoherent words. Hai wrapped his arms around her, soothing her trembling body, and sat down, opening the diary. Page after page unfolded before her like painful slashes from a forgotten past. Inside, Han had poured out her suffering, the false accusations, the bitter betrayal by the villagers, the horror of being locked away in that house for 3 days before she chose death as her only escape. Each line was scrawled in shaky handwriting, the ink smudged and blurred as if soaked in blood and tears. And clutched the diary tightly, a wave of helplessness crashing over her. Min skimmed through a few pages, cursing under his breath. Damn it, those people were monsters. How could they drive such a kind girl to death? Hai's voice was low, heavy. "But what do we do now? We can't just know the truth and do nothing." And lifted her tear-filled eyes, her voice raw. "We have to clear her name. We have to make the village see the truth." But at that moment, the ceiling light above them flickered violently and went out. Darkness engulfed the room, and an overwhelming stench of blood filled the air, making it hard to breathe. In the suffocating silence, they heard the faint dripping sound of water, or perhaps something thicker, hitting the floor. One cold, heavy drop at a time, and fumbled for her flashlight. When the weak beam finally pierced the darkness, they all turned pale. Scrawled across the wall in thick, Dark red liquid were the chilling words. "Do not interfere, or each of you will die." Lan broke into sobs. Min pressed himself against the wall, his voice trembling. It knows we're here. It's warning us." Hai clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "No, we can't back down now. If we give up, she'll be trapped here forever." And drew a deep, shuddering breath, steadying herself. She stared at the diary, at the desperate pleas written there, and silently vowed, "I won't give up. I'll bring the truth to light." That night, no one dared to sleep. Every creak and whisper of the wind sent chills down their spines. Outside the window, the ocean winds shrieked like anguished wails from the dead. In a daze, and heard the faint sound of a girl crying, a sorrowful, pleading voice whispering in her ear, "Save me, please save me." When she startled awake, she found a silver bracelet, the only possession Han had managed to keep. According to the diary, resting neatly beside her pillow, even though it hadn't been there before, and clutched the bracelet, her hand ice cold. She understood then. The battle with the restless spirit haunting the abandoned house had only just begun. And far worse horrors still awaited them, and clutched the silver bracelet tightly in her hand throughout the night, not daring to let go, as if holding onto a fragile thread connecting the living and the dead. Her eyes stayed fixed on the darkest corner of the room, where the heavy blackness seemed ready to swallow everything whole. Min and Hai sat silently in the corner, no one speaking a word. Outside, the sound of crashing waves and howling winds carried the mournful cries of wandering souls deep into the night. As dawn barely broke, and jerked awake at a strange noise, in the dim light of early morning, she saw Lan sitting silently in front of the mirror. It wasn't the same vacant, lost Lan from the past few days, it was something else entirely. Her back was rigid, her head tilted slightly to one side, her hair cascading down, hiding most of her face. And shivered, she crept closer, whispering softly, "Lan." No response, and gently touched Lan's shoulder. It was ice cold. At that moment, Lan's head snapped around, her eyes were hollow, soulless, and her lips moved to form broken words in a voice that wasn't hers, a voice that was raspy, aged, and foreign. "The one who stole my life will pay the price." And stumbled backward, her heart racing. Min and Hai, hearing the noise, rushed over. Hai grabbed Lan, shaking her, pleading, "Lan, wake up, it's me, it's me." Lan suddenly let out a chilling, shrill laugh, a laugh so cold and sharp it cut through the room, and then threw Hai across the room with a force far beyond her fragile frame, and stared in horror at Lan, or rather, at the thing now inhabiting her body. There was no doubt anymore. Lan was possessed. Min shouted, "We have to exorcise her. If we don't, she's going to die." But how? In this remote fishing village, there were no shamans, no exorcists to turn to. And gripped the silver bracelet even tighter. An idea flashed in her mind. Maybe this bracelet was the key. Without hesitation, and lunged forward and fastened the bracelet onto Lan's wrist. The moment the bracelet touched her skin, Lan convulsed violently and collapsed to the floor. A blood-curdling scream tore through the air, making An's chest tighten with pain. Lan writhed uncontrollably, her limbs thrashing, her mouth spewing out anguished cries. Min hurried to soak a towel in cold water and pressed it against Lan's forehead, while Hai clung to her, calling her name through his tears. Finally, after a long struggle, Lan's body went limp, and knelt down, pressing her ear against Lan's chest. Her heart was still beating, but faintly. Lan opened her eyes. They shimmered with tears, filled with terror. And it won't forgive us. It's angrier than before. And squeezed Lan's hand, her voice breaking. "Don't be afraid. We'll save you. We'll save her, and ourselves." But deep inside, fear gnawed at An's soul. If a vengeful spirit had reached the point of possession, then this wasn't just a plea for justice anymore. It was a demand for blood. That afternoon, the group gathered to plan their next move, and decided they would hold a small ritual right inside the abandoned house. They would use the silver bracelet, the diary, and a single white candle to guide Han's spirit to peace. Min protested fiercely. Hai hesitated, but after everything that had happened to Lan, none of them had the heart to walk away. As evening fell, the sky darkened into an ominous gray. They prepared everything: a simple white candle, an old flashlight, the diary carefully wrapped in a white cloth, and the silver bracelet, now their only protection, and stood before the abandoned house, clutching the flickering candle in her hand. "Let's go," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to her friends or trying to convince herself. The rickety wooden door creaked open. Once again, they stepped into the domain of death. The stench of mold and decay slammed into them, thick enough to choke, and lit the candle and placed it on the ancient altar in the corner. She opened the diary and began to read aloud the final words of Han. Her trembling voice echoed through the cold, hollow house. "I stole nothing. I am innocent. Please clear my name." The candle's flame suddenly flared up violently, burning an eerie blue, casting ghastly shadows across the room. In the flickering blue light, a figure emerged, a girl in a blood-stained white dress. Her long hair matted, standing silently, staring at them with eyes full of endless sorrow and rage. And swallowed hard, fighting to keep from trembling, she lifted the silver bracelet high, her voice cracking. "We believe you. We will help you." The wind inside the house whipped into a frenzy, snuffing out the candle instantly. Darkness engulfed them, and from within the darkness, a sorrowful voice echoed, a chorus of countless lost souls. "Not just the truth. Blood. There must be blood." A wave of icy cold swept through, hurling them all to the floor. And they knew, the game for justice they had dared to start had no way back. The ocean wind howled through the rotten cracks of the abandoned house, carrying with it the sharp, cold stench that filled the air, and collapsed onto the shattered tile floor. The silver bracelet in her hand now icy cold, weighing down her heart like a heavy stone. Darkness pressed in from every side, thick and alive, as if some unseen force was slowly squeezing the breath out of them. Min struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm from the fall. Hai still held Lan tightly in his arms, his eyes wide with fear. In that dim, suffocating space, the sounds of sobbing echoed all around them, from nowhere, from everywhere, and clenched her fists, willing herself to stay strong. They couldn't fall apart now. She took a deep breath and moved toward Min, helping him stand. "We have to finish the ritual. We have to see this through," and whispered to herself, even as her throat tightened. The group huddled together and managed to relight the white candle. Its tiny flame flickered and danced, almost snuffed out by the relentless wind, and opened the diary again, her voice trembling as she read the final words left by Han, her small hopes, her simple dreams, her deep fears that no one had ever understood. In the wavering candlelight, the entire house seemed to change. The peeling walls began to ooze thick, dark blood. Water seeped through the cracked ceiling, dripping steadily onto the floor. The ground beneath their feet felt deathly cold, as if they had stepped into another world. Suddenly, from the end of the hallway, came the sound of slow, dragging footsteps, dry, deliberate, and ominous, as if someone was dragging themselves across the rotten wood floor, and held her breath. The group turned their heads in unison. A white figure, with long hair hanging down to cover her face, was slowly moving toward them, and didn't need to see clearly. She knew. It was Han, the restless spirit, her anger now reaching a terrifying peak. Lan suddenly screamed, her whole body trembling violently. Hai clutched her tighter, shouting, "Don't let her get close. If she touches Lan, she'll take her away." Min backed up against the wall, mumbling frantic prayers under his breath, and had no choice. She bit her lip, raised the silver bracelet high, and stepped forward. Her voice quivered but stayed firm as she spoke. "We know you were wronged. We believe you, but please, stop. Don't let your anger bring more innocent suffering." The white figure paused, just a few steps away. In that moment, the candle flared brightly, casting a harsh light across the ghost's face, a face bruised and swollen. Dark purple splotches marring her neck and shoulders, her eyes blank and bloodshot, brimming with bloody tears. and could barely breathe, but she stood her ground. She held the diary out in front of her and said slowly, "We will bring the truth to light. We will let the whole village know that you were innocent. Please, trust us." A choked sob echoed through the house. The floor trembled as if shaken by an earthquake. The wind howled wildly, tearing at everything in the room. The candle blew out instantly, plunging them into thick darkness, and squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the diary to her chest, bracing herself for the worst. But instead of an attack, she felt only a cold breeze brushing against her cheek, like a hand. Heavy with sorrow but no longer filled with hatred. When Anne dared to open her eyes, the white figure was gone. The house was still shrouded in darkness, but the suffocating anger that had once filled the air was no longer there. Anne collapsed onto the floor, tears spilling freely down her face. Lan whispered weakly, She's sparing us, for now, but it's not over." Hai gathered Lan into his arms, his face still pale with fear. Min slumped against the wall, shaking, unable to speak, and stood up, wiped her tears away, and gripped the diary tightly. "Tomorrow, we go see the village chief. We have to make them confess. If we don't, she will never find peace." Outside, the wind continued to howl. Rain began to fall, icy droplets hammering the broken roof, each one landing with a hollow, mournful thud. The game was far from over, and the worst was still yet to come. It rained through the night. By morning, the dirt road leading into the fishing village was a muddy, slippery mess, as if trying to trap anyone who dared leave, and stood silently under the motel's awning, her eyes gazing far into the gray mist where the abandoned house loomed like a ghost. She clutched the diary tightly in her hands, the only proof that could clear Han's name. Inside, Lan was still weak, lying motionless on the bed, occasionally twitching as if tortured by nightmares. Hai sat by her side, refusing to leave for even a second. Min paced the room restlessly, shooting anxious glances out the window. "We have to go see the village chief," and said softly, her voice firm. "We have to make him admit the truth." Min frowned, hesitant. "Do you really think that old man will listen? He'll probably get the whole village to chase us out," and gave a sad smile. "If we don't try, we'll be trapped in this nightmare forever." Without wasting another moment, they braved the rain, carrying with them the diary and the silver bracelet, their only protection, and headed straight to the chief's house. The chief's house sat at the far end of the village, its stone walls covered in moss, its old wooden gate creaking in the wind and rain. When it knocked, after a long pause, a frail old man, his wary eyes peering out from behind thick glasses, cracked the door open, his expression guarded, and greeted him politely, quickly holding out the diary. "We found this in the abandoned house. Please, sir, take a look." The old man glanced at it, his eyes flashing briefly with fear, but he quickly masked it, waving them off dismissively. "There's no need to dredge up the past. That house should be left alone," and refused to back down. She stepped forward, her voice steady. Han was innocent. The village was wrong. "Please, sir, help set the record straight, so her soul can finally rest." The chief gripped the door tighter, his voice cold and sharp. No one forced her to die. If she was truly innocent, why didn't she wait to clear her name? She chose death. No one else is to blame. His cruel words hidden like a knife to the heart. She choked, unable to speak. Min, furious, stepped forward and shouted, "It was your silence that killed her. Your cowardice. You let her die because you were too scared to face the truth." The old man's face darkened with rage. He glared at them and slammed the door in their faces. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the narrow alley, sealing their fate, and stood frozen in the rain, tears mixing with the cold water streaming down her face. Hai stepped up beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "We did everything we could, but Anne knew it wasn't over." The moment the village chief denied the truth, they had condemned themselves, and the entire fishing village, to a wrath that could no longer be undone. That evening, an eerie darkness swallowed the village. The wind died down, the sea fell silent, the air thickened with the stench of death. One by one, The streetlights flickered out, leaving only the faint glow of a few struggling oil lamps inside the houses. And sat by the window, clutching the silver bracelet, her heart heavy with dread. Outside, the darkness seemed alive, swirling and creeping, like thousands of restless spirits waiting to strike. Then the howling of dogs ripped through the silence, long and mournful, sending shivers down their spines. Min sprang to his feet, his face drained of color. Hai and Lan, too, turned tense, their eyes locked on the door. A dry, hollow sound echoed from the courtyard, and cracked the window open, holding her breath as she peered outside. In the misty drizzle, she saw the figure of a woman in a white dress, her long wet hair hiding her face, standing silently in the yard, her bare feet caked with mud. Lan screamed and clung tightly to Hai. Min rushed to slam the window shut. But then came the knocking. Thud, thud, thud. 3 heavy, hollow knocks, like the call of something from beyond the grave. And clutched the silver bracelet tighter. Trying to stay calm, Min whispered, "Don't open it, don't go outside." But the knocking continued, growing louder and more urgent. And then, from the gap beneath the door, a thick black liquid began to seep into the house, snaking across the floor like a living creature. Spreading quickly, Hai yanked Lan back toward the corner of the room, and's hands went numb, her heart pounding wildly. She knew, this was no longer just about Han's spirit. The village's refusal to admit their sins had awakened something far worse. The resentment had festered, had deepened, and now, it was no longer just seeking justice. It was demanding destruction. Outside, the howling dogs turned into whimpers of pain, blending with the rising roar of the wind, a wind that carried the cries of countless lost souls rising from the depths of the sea. The motel trembled violently, and in that moment, and heard it, clear and unmistakable, a voice, broken and filled with grief, whispering into her ear, "No forgiveness, no forgetting, no peace." That night, the rain suddenly stopped, the sky turned pitch black, without moon or stars. A suffocating silence blanketed the entire fishing village, so heavy that even taking a step felt like forcing your way through it. And curled up in the corner of the room, clutching the silver bracelet tightly in her hands, beside her, Min, Hai, and Lan were wide awake, none able to sleep. The flickering oil lamp cast faint, wavering light over their anxious faces. Suddenly, a shrill scream tore through the deathly stillness, and jumped up, her heart hammering wildly. Min rushed to open the window. From a house not far away, lights flared on chaotically, and the sounds of crying and shouting filled the air. "What's happening?" Hai whispered, his voice trembling. No one needed to answer. The news spread like a poisonous wind. Mr. Sao, the first villager to deny the truth about Han's death, had just been found hanging from the old almond tree at the entrance to the village, in a position so horrifying no one dared look directly at it. The next morning, the fishing village felt like a giant coffin. People gathered to whisper, their eyes darting nervously, filled with fear. No one dared mention Han's name, but no one dared deny the series of mysterious deaths sweeping through the village either. In just one morning, 2 more deaths were discovered. Aunt Tu the fishmonger and Uncle Bay the net mender, found drowned in the village well. Even though the well was so shallow it was impossible to drown in. Fear gnawed at the village. Doors slammed shut early, and adults and children alike huddled inside, praying in silence. Min, Hai, and Lan sat quietly under the eaves, feeling the cold seep deep into their bones. Lan whispered, her voice cracking, She's not forgiving anymore," and nodded, her throat tight. They had seen enough the night before. They knew now. The blood debt demanded payment, and it would not stop until every person who had wronged Han paid in blood. But if the entire village remained stubborn, how many more would have to die? As dusk fell, and realized they couldn't wait any longer, Min, and Hai returned to the abandoned house, bringing the diary and the silver bracelet. They had to find another clue, a way to break the curse. The sea wind stung their faces. The decaying wooden house loomed ahead in the blood-red sunset, like a wounded beast crying out. As they stepped inside, the stench of blood and decay was stronger than ever. Dark, dried blood stained the walls, as if marking the invisible carnage that had taken place, and lit a white candle, placing it at the center of the living room. The flickering flame illuminated the cracked wall behind the old altar. Suddenly, and noticed something hidden behind the rotting panels. She stepped closer, hands trembling as she pried the wood away. A small wooden chest appeared, locked tightly with a rusted chain. Min pulled a small knife from his pocket and, with great effort, cut through the chain. The chest sprang open. Inside was a bundle of long hair, silvered with age, wrapped tightly around a tattered silk cloth. Anne's hands shook as she unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a yellowed piece of paper, covered in shaky handwriting. The one who framed me was the village chief. On the back of the paper were dates and details, the day Han was imprisoned, and the day she ended her own life in despair, and stood frozen, heart-pounding. They had found it, the final proof. There could be no more denial. But at that moment, the house began to shake. The wind howled through every crack. The rotten wood moaned. Sobbing voices rose from all around them, and jerked her head up. In the flickering darkness, she saw them, shadowy figures, drifting silently across the house. The spirits, victims of the growing hatred. Innocent souls trapped in a storm of vengeance with no escape. Lan screamed. Hai grabbed her and pulled her toward the door. Min seized Anne's hand, shouting, "Run, the house is collapsing," and clutched the bundle of evidence to her chest and fled with the others into the black rain. Behind them, the abandoned house shuddered violently, then began to crack apart, like a dying beast letting out its final anguished cry before crumbling into nothing. The howling and wailing echoed across the sky, and through the chaos, and heard it, a faint, sorrowful whisper, "Return justice, or die with me." The rain stopped by early morning, revealing a gloomy sky that hung heavily over the fishing village like a mourning shroud. The muddy red dirt road was marked with footprints from the chaos of the previous night. The air was thick with fear, and the whispered gossip around the village cut through the skin like icy needles. And sat curled up in the corner of the house, clutching the cloth bundle containing the final evidence, the farewell letter and the silvered bundle of hair. Hai and Min sat beside her, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Lan lay curled up on the floor, her vacant eyes staring into space, occasionally flinching at unseen terrors, and knew they didn't have much time left. The rage from the abandoned house had grown into a storm, and it wouldn't stop until the truth was dragged into the light. Without hesitation, and made a decision, they had to call a village meeting. They had to expose the truth in front of everyone, no matter the consequences. Min looked at her, doubt in his eyes. "You really think they'll believe us? The whole village is ruled by fear. They'd rather bury the truth than face their guilt." And clenched her fists. "If we don't do this, more people will die. Lan, us, none of us will escape." Hai nodded. "Let's do it. At this point, it's the only way." By noon, Anne, Min, and Hai went door to door, summoning the villagers to the small square at the edge of the village. People slowly gathered, casting wary, fearful glances at each other. The village chief stood among them, his face as cold and hard as stone, and stepped forward, holding up the farewell letter high above her head. Her voice trembled but rang clear across the murmuring crowd. "We found the final proof in the abandoned house. Han was innocent. The one who destroyed her was the village chief." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Some gasped in horror. Some shook their heads in denial. But most faces were filled with sheer terror. The chief sneered coldly, stepping forward, his voice dripping with venom. "Lies. You've been bewitched. Now you dare accuse the living?" And lifted the letter higher, her voice breaking but her gaze steady. "This is Han's handwriting. She left it before she died. You framed her, and all of you helped cover it up." The chief's face flushed red with rage. His eyes gleamed with malice as he shouted, pointing at Anne, "Don't let them fool you. Stirring up the past will only bring more disaster." The crowd erupted into chaos. Some believed, some doubted, some broke down in panic. Old women wailed, Children screamed in terror. The square descended into a living hell. And then, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A bone-chilling wind swept across the square. And looked up. In the dark gray sky, shadowy figures appeared, countless twisted forms. Countless blank white eyes, all glaring down at the panicked crowd. Min grabbed in, pulling her back, his voice shaking. She's here. Han is here. Lan collapsed to the ground, clutching her head, screaming, "Please forgive us. Please don't kill us." The villagers scattered, trampling over each other in a frenzy of terror. The chief stood frozen, blood drained from his face. And then, in one horrifying moment, a white figure plunged from the sky. A blood-curdling scream ripped through the square. The village chief fell to the ground. His eyes rolled back, his mouth gaping open as if trying to speak, but no words came. Blood spread across the ground, dark and thick, and covered her face, tears streaming down. She knew Han had claimed the justice she was owed. But the price was too high. The nightmare wasn't over. The dark shadows still hovered in the sky. Tornadoes of wind tore through the village, ripping apart houses, shattering doors, snapping power poles like twigs, and grabbed Min and Hai, shouting over the roar of the storm, "Run! Get out of the village! Hurry!" They ran, stumbling through knee-deep mud, the broken branches and debris tearing at their skin. The screams, the sobs, the howling winds, all fused into a deafening symphony of chaos and death. And through the terror, and heard it again, that familiar, sorrowful whisper in her ear. Justice has been served, but the hatred has not ended. The group raced out of the fishing village through a torrential downpour of mud, their hearts pounding as if they would burst, and led the way, clutching the cloth bundle containing the old diary and the farewell letter, the last evidence left behind by Han. Behind her, Min supported Lan while Hai ran, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting vengeful spirits to close in at any moment. The howling wind sounded like the cries of bitter souls, carrying the heavy stench of blood. Even as they reached the village's edge, the air around them remained suffocating, crushed by an unseen darkness. They collapsed beneath the old almond tree, gasping for breath, their bodies covered in mud. Lan slumped to the ground, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, her body frail and weak like a wilted blade of grass battered by the storm. And gazed back at the fishing village, where the low houses swayed and crumbled under the merciless storm of resentment. She knew it wasn't over. Justice had been paid in blood, but the hatred had not been appeased. Han's soul was still not at peace. "We have to hold a ritual," and whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the wind. Min shook his head, despair clouding his eyes. "How? There's no monk, no one who knows the rites here." Hai clenched his fists. "We can't just leave her trapped in anger like this," and looked at the bundle in her hands, her heart tightening. She knew that to end it, they would have to return to the abandoned house, face the anguished spirit themselves, and beg for forgiveness. Without a word, she stood up, wiping the mud from her clothes, her eyes blazing with determination. Min and Hai exchanged a glance and nodded. They went back. When they returned, the fishing village was nothing but a wasteland. Collapsed houses, streets swallowed by mud, scattered survivors huddling together in the ruins, their eyes empty and haunted. No one stopped them, no one had the strength to. The abandoned house still stood there, alone, like a festering wound bleeding out in the heart of the village. Min, Hai, and Lan lit 3 incense sticks in front of the house. Each silently prayed, hands clasped together, begging for forgiveness for sins that were not theirs. And stepped inside first. In her hands, the old diary was held high, the farewell letter fluttering in the heavy morning wind. Her voice rose, slow and choked with emotion. "Han, please hear us. We believe you. We have brought the truth to light. Those who wronged you have paid the price. Please let go of your anger, so your soul may finally rest, so this village can be reborn." A cold wind swept past, snuffing out the incense. Silence descended like a heavy shroud. Then, from the deepest shadows of the house, a white figure emerged, The girl with long hair, her tattered white dress, her bruised and tear-streaked face. But this time, her eyes no longer burned with hatred. They were filled only with exhaustion, despair, and release, and collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, forgive them. Forgive us too." The white figure stood still for a long moment. Then slowly, she reached out and brushed her fingers against the diary clutched to Anne's chest. A gentle breeze rose, lifting the pages of the diary, sending them fluttering through the air like free birds. A strange light shone through the broken roof, illuminating the girl's form as she faded, dissolving into shimmering silver mist that floated up to the heavens. The final sob faded into the wind. Han's spirit was finally free. When Anne opened her eyes, the abandoned house was nothing more than crumbling walls, with green grass beginning to sprout between the cracks of the old floor. There was no more blood in the air, no more mournful wails, only the salty sea breeze blowing gently, and the distant, peaceful sound of waves. Min helped land to her feet. Hai placed a hand on Anne's shoulder. The four of them walked away from the house in silence. But inside each of them, a strange peace bloomed. Far in the distance, the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the battered village. A new beginning, after all the sorrow. Anne turned back for one last look. And in that moment, she saw, standing faintly at the broken doorway, a girl in a white dress, smiling gently. Then, she faded into the light, as if she had never been there at all. Dear friends, the story of the abandoned house in the fishing village has come to an end. The restless spirit has been set free, and the injustice has been turned into peace. But somewhere out there, among the remote fishing villages and crumbling old houses, there may still be untold stories, still be souls quietly waiting for someone to hear their sorrow. If you love touching and mysterious stories like this, please hit subscribe, like, and share to join me in discovering more hidden mysteries. And don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts below this video. I'll see you again, on the next journey, on the fragile line between light and darkness.